My name is Patrick Sun, and I am the Managing Director of the National Operations Center of Excellence. And we are excited for you to actually be a part of us on this webinar for looking at performance, TMC performance dashboard. And we have a great speaker lineup. Just want to let you know that the National Operations Center of Excellence offers a variety of resources to support the transportation systems management and operations community. And you will also see some useful links along with the webinar slides that we can have available for you to download during this webinar and afterwards when we have the recording up. I did want to note on the useful links, there is a link to the TMC pooled fund study that we're going to be talking about if you're not aware of it. Just to cover a couple of quick logistics, everyone on this webinar will be muted, and so if you have any questions, please enter them in the question pod here. Let me just type it in one more time in case you didn't see it. And then also to let you know that this webinar will be recorded and it will be available within a couple of days in our on-demand learning session. And so we encourage you to ask any questions that you have, and we'll do a Q&A at the end of the presentation. So with that, we will go ahead and get started with our first presenter and also kind of organizer for this webinar, John Obenberger from the Federal Highway Administration. John.
Patrick, thank you for that introduction. I'd like to welcome everybody to the webinar titled Traffic Management Center Performance Dashboards. As Patrick mentioned, all of the presentations are available for download in this webinar, and there's also a web page where the recorded session and all the presentations will be available for folks to download. Also, I want to thank Patrick and all of the staff from the National Operations Center for Excellence for all their hard work and their willingness to work with the Federal Highway Administration and the TMC Pooled Fund Study for supporting and hosting this webinar. If you're not familiar with the TMC Pooled Fund Study, please reach out to me after the webinar. I'll provide more information in addition to the web link that Patrick has provided in the presentations. But briefly, the Pooled Fund Study is about 25 state DOTs, local agencies, and regional authorities, and we're hoping to get some toll authorities to join the Pooled Fund Study in the coming year. All of the members pool money each year, work in collaboration to identify priorities and pursue a handful of small number of projects each year to develop technology transfer products available for others to share information around the country based on the successful practices that we've identified from those projects. And this project around the webinar that we're talking about today is one perfect example of the hard work and the products that are produced based on the collaboration that was identified by the TMC Pooled Fund Study members. And just for a quick overview of the webinar, we're going to explore the what, why, and issues agencies should consider with planning, developing, and using performance dashboards for the TMCs. We're hoping at the end of the webinar that you'll be able to have a greater appreciation for what is a dashboard, how you can use those to manage traffic operations, as well as any other component, service, function, or capability or traffic management center, and then how you can use the dashboards to convey the benefits of your TMC to others within your agency. We've got a great list of speakers today that are going to cover the TMC dashboards project and also some of the work that was undertaken during the project and what will be in the final report when it's published and available online, and we'll provide that link to you later where you can find that on the TMC Pooled Fund Study. But also we have two great examples from state DOTs that we identified as a part of this project. And so we're fortunate to have Mark Sommerhauser and Christine Sheffick, that will cover some of the stuff that they've been doing in Kansas City, Missouri, and the Florida DOT. So with that, I'm going to turn over the presentation to John McAdam. John was the lead point of contact for the TMC Pooled Fund Study as the concept for this project was developed. The scope of work was put together, and he coordinated the involvement of all the TMC Pooled Fund Study members in the review of this project as it advanced. John is the lead for the operations traffic operations program for the Ohio DOT. John, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, John, and thank you both for mentioning the pooled fund study. And we'll just give one more plug here. I'll be the third person to point you to the website. If you are not yet a member, we've been fortunate at Ohio to be a member for a handful of years and have found the group very productive and the projects very beneficial to anybody in and around TMCs or operations or TSMO. So please do check out the website or reach out to any of the existing members. So on to the topic of today, a project that was selected with high priority from the pooled fund study, topic of TMC dashboards, why they are needed. So for those of us in and around TMCs, the large amount of data is no stranger. The data that comes into TMCs, but be it through an ATMS, all of the data feeds that we have, the camera feeds, weather, incident, closures. We get an onset of data, and then we also, as TMCs, generate lots of data for the motoring public, for other partners, for DOTs. And so one of the main purposes of this project was to figure out how do we turn this data into information, both for internal TMC audiences, but also for external, whether it be at the DOT or even outside of the DOT. How do we share this information? How do we make sense of it? What are some of the best practices to highlight the benefits of operations, the benefits of TMC functions? And so we're going to hear about some of those findings today. And here were some of the stated goals of the dashboard project. How do you plan for a project? What data sources are incorporated? What are the current state? What are some of the best practices? You heard John review a couple that will be highlighted as best practices. Are there current trends? What sort of data gets brought in? I already mentioned how do we visualize that. And then they're going to talk about the final results in the final report and where that gets published. And one of the stated goals also was to conduct a webinar. So very excited about the project. I'm happy to have represented the pooled fund study on this project, and we will be doing Q&A towards the end. At this time, I'm happy to hand it over to the project team. I think we're going to start with Mike Santillo from VHB talking about why dashboards are needed.
Thank you, John. This is Mike. Someone is off mute. That's better. Thank you. This is Mike Santillo from VHB. I'm part of the ICF team that worked on this project, and I was the principal investigator. And I am going to just briefly introduce what exactly a TMC dashboard is and why they are needed. TMC dashboard is a communication tool that displays information in a user-friendly format. This is very important these days because there are a lot of new data sources out there that provide practitioners and the general public with a ton of great information, but there's so much information out there that sometimes it's difficult to present it all in a useful fashion. If you have a dashboard, that can overcome that by organizing the information, displaying it in a user-friendly format that is easy to read, comprehend, and manipulate in ways that are useful for the end user. Specifically, within a TMC environment, the dashboard will communicate the status and the performance of specific operations that occur within a TMC, and it also helps the TMC justify its existence by communicating the benefits of traffic operations to the various stakeholders, both within the transportation industry and outside the transportation industry. A lot of people that are not in the transportation industry don't necessarily understand the importance of the TMC. They think of roadway operations as snow plowing and repaving and things like that, and they don't really consider day-to-day operations. But having information available in an easy-to-understand format that describes the benefits of good operations practices and planning, this will help people understand why there's a need to have transportation management centers, highway help trucks, and other similar operations infrastructure. So there are various different types of TMC performance dashboards out there. Planning dashboards are dashboards that will help acquire and compile information that help for future both operations and capital improvement planning. Operations dashboards, a lot of those will show real-time information about the transportation network, roadway speeds, traffic signal status, a whole bunch of different items that you can use there with operations dashboards. Reporting dashboards are used to generate reports and information that can be passed on to elected officials or other important stakeholders to the TMC. And then maintenance dashboards are used to track maintenance items and other important maintenance issues needed to keep the transportation system operating smoothly. And then lastly, there are advanced traveler information systems dashboards, these are the ones that are public facing. The public can either bring them up on their phone, hopefully before they're driving and not while they're driving, or they could call into a 511 system. A lot of these traveler information systems are all linked together to help people better plan their trip in advance. So as for why are TMC dashboards needed, John covered a lot of this before, but I think one of the main things I'll add is just that there's a lot of behind-the-scenes processing that needs to take place with data, and that needs to take place, and it needs to be displayed on a dashboard in a way that the end user can easily get the information that they need quickly and comprehend it the way they need to comprehend it. The information that's displayed on a dashboard, it will assist with both short and long-term transportation decision-making. Short-term could include how we respond to an incident that's happening right now. Longer-term could involve planning for the transportation network in the future, and many of the stakeholders also include government officials and decision makers. So the ability to concisely communicate a need for a certain transportation program or project to the decision makers that are funding the transportation system and these projects is absolutely critical. And that is something that a dashboard can definitely assist with. So that is just a very brief introduction of what a TMC dashboard is, why it is needed, and the project team is going to get into some more details about that. John already introduced a lot of the project aspects, but the main thing is there were two pieces to it. There was a research component to go look at the existing state of the practice, and then there was a documentation component where we kind of synthesized all the information into one concise document that will be published soon. So with that, I will turn this over to Tim Lomax. Tim is with the Texas A&M University Transportation Institute, also part of the ICF team, and his role was to conduct the targeted
Thanks very
outreach
much, Mike.
exercise.
To start walking through just a few slides, we looked at, initially we looked at the top 50 metro areas. We obviously drew heavily on the TMC pool fund study and had a targeted outreach with another 9 TMCs to give us some geographic and size distribution. Some of these covered a metro area, some of these were more regional or state. We wanted to try to capture what was going on in both of those. We got a total of 34 responses, and we greatly appreciated those. The basic process was, rather than just send somebody an email that gets sent into the clutter filter and junk box, we called up each traffic management center. We talked through what we were trying to accomplish and how we were hopefully going to benefit the traffic management center community, and also describe the variety of ways that we could get their input. We did have a survey set of questions, but we also wanted to make sure that that worked, and if a phone call would be better, or we had a download, a place where you could download displays to us. It's just a whole bunch of different submission options that we offered. The original, or the goal of this was to find out, sort of go back to the start of the original dashboard setup, what the motivations were, who was involved, what technologies were involved, and then look at the ongoing and future activities and maintenance usage, the whole process. So a quick scan on the agencies in the traffic management centers that responded. State DOTs, obviously, but in a little bit, close to half the cases, state police were co-located. There are also a variety of other agencies you can see there that were in the TMCs. Not surprisingly, some of the historic functions of traffic management centers were present in just about all of those 34 responding: event management, freeway management, unplanned events, like incident management, those sorts of elements, and planned special events. Traveler information was also a fairly significant component in each of those responding TMCs. Service patrols, again, tied to unplanned events and freeway management. Communication among agencies also featured pretty prominently. Some of the newer functions were in the half or a little bit less range: arterial street traffic management, traffic signal management, and managed lane operations. So why were the TMCs initially formed? What were they trying to accomplish? What were they, to the best of the respondents' memory, what were the reasons for doing the projects? I think it's not surprising that most of them were to monitor performance, to find the easily available, easily readable data and turn it into something that performance could be monitored. For the most part, internal operations, but also a fair amount of external sources or external attributes, factors, elements. The monthly, some of the reporting rolled into monthly or annual reports on incidents, outcome measures, integrating with other project technologies, but also on a process or collaboration realm, there was an interest in making the data available across other agencies, and getting feedback on other systems. But again, fairly modest set of goals. In terms of what data are being used now, the crash and incident data, traffic speed, travel time, those are all, again, fairly historic, fairly long-standing relationships within the traffic management centers. either using their own devices or more recently using some third-party vendor to grab information like that. Weather information is also a key component. So key that I've got it twice there. I'm not really sure what that other one is. Sorry about that. Also the traffic volume. Again, there's that's if you think about the last 10 years or so, traffic volume is probably a less frequently mentioned component of this as some of the practices move towards travel speed and travel time, but certainly traffic volume is a very important element of this. Looking at the dashboard and what sorts of information gets displayed on those, a lot of times it's the internal working elements of the dashboard. It's traffic management center status, device uptime, where are the service patrols, what's their response time, what's their clearance time, mapping the crashes both in real time, but then also looking at patterns. Website hits is one that probably wasn't initially in in many of the traffic management center patterns or ways of doing business, but that's a much easier piece of information to get now and can help identify what the usage patterns are. And then increasingly going to some public-facing side that can allow the public to click on events, for sure using this in the internal workings of the system to try to help make sure that the right resources are responding in the right time and to try to coordinate some of that with what's going on with an event. Just a couple examples of what we saw, what got submitted to us. This one from the chart system in Maryland has some easy graphics, some display elements on the left side, some a map that can be used to click on events as they pop up to find out what the status is. Elements such as that can help provide the operators with a way to understand what's going on. And a fair amount of diagnostics on what pavement is going on. The ability to click on an individual resource and find out where they are as well. So public-facing dashboards typically are not as important a component, at least for the respondents that we had. As I said, the traffic speed, volume, weather, crash and incident, the sort of base level monitoring of the system, wanting to provide the public with as much information as we can relatively easily. Those are the most common elements. I think when you start looking at why that is, those are obviously connections to the core mission of the state DOTs and the state police that are usually in the operation, but they also form a way to evaluate not just the operation of the TMC and the system, but also the staff and resource allocations, and they're very good components of before-after analysis and attempting to help the TMC tell their story in terms of what benefits do we get out of the systems. Change has been a constant part of the evolution. I think most of the responders pointed to that, said something along the lines of, if you'd asked me this question 5 years ago, I would have answered it differently, and 5 years from now I'll probably have a different set of information. Certainly, as I pointed to, the third-party data sources are a fixture and are becoming more relevant, more used, but also new agency goals as we move into a system where the operations is increasingly being asked to play other supportive roles within the DOT. They're finding other desired attributes. In some cases, those are mandated either by upper level management or legislative or executive functions within the state or the region. Certainly, user feedback and public comment is a way that these functions have changed and evolved. I think having the stakeholder meetings, as several of the agencies talked about, either annual or biannual, set of official stakeholder meetings where the discussion is about what's happening now and what are the changes that they wish to have. And it's important to note those are not just external stakeholder meetings. Those are internal, both within the TMC operator community, the groups that are actually working on the floors or working with virtual systems, but also within the DOT. We're trying to connect to planning, design, staffs, elements like that, trying to make better use of the data. And also, as we'll talk about here in a minute, some new analytic platforms or data integration services. When we look at improvement goals, displaying real-time events is something that can help not just the internal TMC operators, but the external, the public, the media, the governmental functions, helping them understand what's going on is an increasing part of the performance dashboards. Trying to improve just the look and feel of the dashboards. Some of these systems are older, and there's a lot better user interfaces that can be deployed. Certainly, as more agencies, city, county, regional, within a state and within a region, they're looking at dashboarding, looking at operations. There's an interest in greater flexibility across those agencies, trying to make the information easier to use. Graphic displays and customizable features are also an element that I think you're going to see. There seemed to be a lot of effort on put forth by the TMCs to try to make some of these happen. So again, just a summary of some of these enhancements, data sources, analysis capabilities, certainly using the information that we have in a much better, more productive way, both within the agencies, but also sharing to other stakeholders, working on achieving that common communication platform, making sure that the dashboard is serving the needs of not just the internal TMC agencies, but also the external folks. As I said, new capabilities in terms of visualization or presentation are an increasing part of state and regional agencies, and traffic management centers are going to draw on that as well. Certainly making the report preparation easier, making the before-after reports easier to accomplish, easier to disseminate is also going to be an element that you see mentioned. It was mentioned in the reporting, and I think that's where a lot of the discussion is oriented. So I'm going to turn it over to Keith Smith. He's a part of the VHB Applied Technology team. He's very well versed in the application development and big data management. That was his role in the project. He's going to talk a little bit about what he found.
Great, thank you, Tim. So I'm Keith Smith with VHB. I'm part of the IFC team as well, but we went through and did this review, and I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about the needs, issues, and some of the technology perspectives to consider, which actually makes my presentation a little bit unique. As you're going to hear as I go through this, I'm going to present a lot more questions to consider as we walk through this, and not quite as many answers, because that's some of the fun of we go through these processes of developing out these dashboards, is figuring out what those answers to those questions actually are. So one of the first places is we actually get into that, and by this point everybody has identified a need for a dashboard, and we're talking about that from whatever that dashboard ultimately means. And usually where that starts from is just identifying out the need, quite literally. And one of the first places is there's a lot of questions around that. And they start off with some relatively high-level questions as far as what do we need it to do, who are our users going to be, Do we have the data? Where does it actually reside at? And does something already exist? And the reason that this is kind of very dynamic, as you heard Tim just mentioning, is that the data itself is constantly changing. Technology is constantly changing. So a lot of what we're going to talk about here as we go through this are things that are going to consistently be shifting, especially nowadays as we continually get more and more information and more data access that simply didn't exist 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And of course, as we look forward, as we're talking about the future with connected vehicle, autonomous vehicle, and just sort of the market saturation of even more cellular phones and other data providers, we're going to continue to see that shift happen. So one of the biggest questions around that when we talk about the need for a dashboard is really, where do we begin? And one of the things that we consistently find is that the stakeholders is really always a good place to start from. This really helps make sure that we identify who our users going to be, and it makes sure that we're actually going to be developing out something that does have a practical need and fits the needs of what those stakeholders are looking for. This is probably one of the most critical pieces because we want to make sure that the actual dashboard itself does fit those needs and that it is actually going to drive that conversation, as well as the stakeholders are going to be the folks who are actually going to answer majority of the questions that we're going to talk through about what do they look like. And as we're pulling in all these different stakeholders, it's good to have a wide variety, but ultimately remember that all your stakeholders, they can kind of fall into different buckets as far as what are their actual needs going to be. If you're looking at operators within the TMC, they're looking for something that they can quickly get an answer to as they're actually working on the network. They're making decisions in real time. For the planners and the engineers, they're a little more planning centric. They've got some time to think about it. That's where you get into the reporting. They're looking at maybe on a wider time range. And of course, our managers and our executive leadership teams, they sort of fall into both categories. And a lot of the time what they're looking for is really that ability to get reporting out of the dashboard so that it's something that helps drive the information forward so they can make good decisions and that everybody can just have access to the best information available. Once we've gone through and sort of figured out who those stakeholders are, the next sort of most important piece of this is to go ahead and set up and figure out what are the goals of this dashboard going to be. And this really helps us just understand and really just identify, prioritize, and figure out exactly what that dashboard's going to do. And this is going to help us kind of make that backbone up of the entire thing. It's really going to make sure that the dashboard stays on track and the things that are going inside of that and the sort of the performance measures that it's finding and that it's working through are going to be able to actually, ultimately give us the answers we're looking for. One of the things that I like to say when we look at this, make sure the goals are SMART, specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. And the idea around that is don't create goals that are sort of so widespread that you simply can't get to them, or have something that you're trying to do that you don't have the data for or isn't measurable. It's not to say that you can't start making steps towards a data set that you know will come online, or to try to solve a question that you know you need to answer. It's just about making sure that there are things that you're doing inside of this dashboard that are ultimately going to give you an answer that you're looking for. And that, of course, comes into that realistic and timely side as well, just to make sure that they are things that are attainable and that you're going to be able to get answers out of it. They're going to be able to drive the needs of their stakeholders. So it gets back to that idea. If you're looking at this being very focused on operators and helping them do things in real time, you want to make sure that the goals around this and the information you're putting in this are helping them answer those types of questions. A couple of the early pitfalls that we tend to find around this is kind of the first and foremost is to make sure that they are in alignment with what the overall traffic management system and the transportation system management and operation program itself, so TSMO, make sure that it is actually lining up with those overall goals. You want to make sure that it does kind of fit into that and it sort of sits within that regional architecture and does help kind of propel the entire thing forward. Make sure that you are engaging those stakeholders. Again, don't go through and develop out the goals, don't develop out needs, don't move forward with this without making sure that you are engaging those individuals, because they're the ones that are going to be able to answer a lot of these questions and are ultimately the users of it. Of course, you want to make sure your goals don't conflict. And then, again, you want to make sure that they are something that's measurable. And that's really a good piece of advice on all of these, is just make sure that that's kind of being driven forward. And that's going to allow to make sure that the dashboard is able to do what it needs to do and get the answers out there that people are looking for. When we're talking about that, sort of what does it look like as we start to take that next step into actually going through a dashboard? Now that we've established who our users are and we started talking a little bit about what the goals are and we've really kind of hammered down the needs, now we're getting into really the kind of core piece of it, of looking at the project level first architecture and then ultimately the requirements of it. So when we talk about the architecture, this is where we get into that conversation of how does it fit into the overall architecture? Does it fit? Does it satisfy the system engineering analysis? Does it satisfy Rule 940? Are all those things getting in alignment? Just to make sure that you're complying with everything that your own rules are. Also understanding, are you going to be able to reutilize existing components? And that really comes into play very importantly when we get into the next section, talking about project requirements, because this helps us understand what are the things that we can leverage. As you kind of heard Tim mention before, we're looking at a lot of different data coming from a lot of different sources. If there are certain tools and different pieces of information out there where people are already managing it and already taking advantage of that, it's better to try to leverage a lot of the things that they've already done than to have to try to build something completely from scratch. And at the same time, can you also customize or reuse anything that's within there? And you've got your different methodologies for software development about how that comes together and how it goes through. And of course, that last one is very important, especially when we're talking about the data itself, and it'll really come into play in just a minute when we talk about some of the questions to answer around the data and the data environment. Is this dashboard intended strictly for internal users, external users, public-facing, not public-facing? Sort of all those different things really do kind of come into play with this, so we understand who those users are and what ultimately they want to be able to do. So the next step after getting that sort of architecture understood is we go into the project requirements. And what we're doing here, this is really sort of setting the groundwork for how everything else is going to work. And you can see sort of what the different things are here. And it can seem very daunting at first because there are a lot of questions that are being asked right up front as you're starting to look at this information and try to figure out sort of what are those next things that we're going to do. So as we go through the project requirements, you'll see as we kind of step into these next slides, I'd like to take it from sort of the base piece, which is the data, and then we'll step into sort of the performance measures or the API section, which is kind of that middle ground, and then we'll ultimately talk about the interface itself. And you can kind of think of it as those three tiers building on top of each other, so that we talk a little bit about what does that database look like, making sure that we are complying with all of the rules, and then ultimately making sure we answer any of those things that are kind of requirements as part of going through a dashboard and understanding what actually needs to go into setting up one of these environments. So as we take a look at that, because this entire dashboard really is about the user interface, and that is sort of the ultimate end game, you want to make sure that you're answering certain questions that are very specific to that. And those kind of come into play here, and you can see them listed in the bullet. But the two I really want to call attention to is really that third one about the data management platform, and then of course the fifth one, which is about the cloud solution and sort of where does the data live. The data management platform is really important in all of this because as we're talking about these project requirements and these different uses, we need to make sure that that data is something that's readily available, we can quickly access. We understand where all of that sits, especially in the case of when we start talking about a lot of these data sets that go into here that are real time. That means they're coming in at extremely high volumes, and they're coming in very quickly. And we need to make sure that there are systems in place that can actually support that. If you have a need to say that you're going to monitor the entire region's traffic, you need to be able to make sure that the data management platform that data is going to reside on, that ultimately is going to feed your dashboard, is capable of doing that. And that's where a lot of that comes in. And of course, the cloud solution piece as well is very important, especially when we talk about security nowadays, of whether or not this is going to be something that's completely internal at a, for the TMC. Is it something that will have a public facing, or exactly where does it sit? And that also comes into play with your internal security policies, is making sure that if it is something that's going to have a public-facing side of it, you're meeting all of your safety protocols that you need to make sure that it is secured. Of course, around the entire idea of the dashboard, data really is the driver of it all. And what we commonly will see here is that we're talking about low latency because for the most part, these TMC dashboards are going to be operationally driven. They're really going to be the ones that we want to be able to get an answer into somebody's hands as quickly as possible, and that it has the ability to sort of be high-speed performance measurements. We don't want to wait 15 minutes for something to come in to tell us something, because by then it may be too late to actually do anything that could actually help improve the network. At the same time, we're also going to have to always be aware of the fact that we have a lot of data coming, and it's always going to come from a lot of different sources, and we have to be ready to sort of receive that. Typically, when we talk about data in these environments, we really do split it into two pieces. We've got our static data sets, which think of that as your roadway network itself. The roads don't necessarily change all that often. They update maybe once a year. And then you've got the dynamic data, which is kind of attributes about that. So this will be the speed of the data or the location of a crash, things that are dynamically changing that you're constantly wanting to update. You want to kind of keep that in mind as far as the data side of this, so that when we get into these questions that we're trying to answer, we really are able to start kind of thinking about that. Because one of the pieces that ties back to ultimately the needs of it is making sure that the data itself can be turned into useful information, which of course we led into performance measurements and performance metrics. But then when you put it on the dashboard or in the reporting, it's able to be transformed into something that's useful. And through that, you want to make sure that you're considering all of these different types of questions that are popping up here so that we understand what is the data format. Are there clear relationships between the data and the roadway? Who's maintaining the data? So that way, if there is a case, whether it's static or dynamic, how are you receiving that data? How often is it being updated? And is it actually coming in a case that does continue to meet your needs? It's not unusual within these environments to find that you will have some data, such as some of the probe data sets, that will come in at every 30 seconds. And you may get the sensors that are out there on the road reporting, it even speeds faster than that. So you've got a constant stream of your speed data coming in. But then there's other data sets such as crash information, wave information, things like that are being fed in that may show up, you have a slight delay or latency on there. And you have to account for that at the fact that you might be seeing some different types of information show up at different times, and how exactly does that sort of all play into it? And of course, how is all that data accessed? Because a lot of these are coming from third-party providers, which means that information is being pulled in from somewhere outside of the network and then is having to be transformed in some way. And when we go through that, we're talking about that transformation piece. Now we're getting into sort of the extract, transform, and load side of it. This is where we're actually taking that data and changing it around. What type of changes are you going to have to do? Are there specific licenses that you need to make sure that you're adhering to that will allow you to do those types of things? When we're talking about the data itself, is this data only meant to be used in real time, or does it need to be saved? Are we running checks against it to say we're going to establish a 2-week baseline or a 6-month baseline or a year-long baseline so we have a constant comparative narrative to it? How are we going through all of that? And of course, the data retention laws still apply to this because once it's inside the TMC, it can be considered public in a lot of ways, as well as maintaining data sensitivity. So once we kind of go through there, and again, that was just a lot of the questions around how do we do this. One of the biggest pieces that comes to the surface there is really about where does that data live? How do we actually go about getting into it, and sort of what do we do with that data? And this is where that environment sort of forms that very clear bottom structure of the data itself. And I sort of think of this as that centralized component that really lets everything build off the top of it. So if you're thinking about this, really is sort of the keystone of the entire piece of it. And we're looking inside of here, you have a lot of options about how does that data sort of reside there. Is it in a relational database such as SQL? Is it in non-relational where we're talking about Hadoop or Elasticsearch or some of the other technologies that are really keyed around the big data world? Is the data itself going to be provided in hot and cold? So is it something that needs to be ready to go right now, or are you relying again on something that you're looking back 2 years to pull information in? Cloud on-premise as well as secure versus open. All these things start to play into that, and it really gets into the idea around how are we going to structure the data and make sure that the environment that's going to support our dashboard is put together so that it really does kind of give it legs to stand on by the time we get to that top level of visualization, and that all that information can be passed up and through it. As we kind of go into that next piece of it, now that we're talked about the data, now we're actually getting into the analytics piece. And this is sort of that middle ground where transformation can happen, where we can actually start taking a lot of that raw data that's coming in and we can start turning it into the useful information. Some of the data comes in and is already dashboard ready. So for instance, we're collecting the information out there that is the reported average speeds. That's pretty much ready to go straight into a dashboard. There's something that can be gained by that immediately by knowing what the speed is. At the same time, there's additional things that need to be looked at, whether it's done through APIs and actually looked at it as figuring out exactly what does that speed look like over a given segment so that we can start transforming it into, say, travel time or pull those different performance measurements out of it. As well as being able to do data fusion, which is where you really start to get into sort of a little bit of the complexity of saying we're going to take 3 or 4 different data sources that are telling us something similar and actually start putting them all together so that it really paints a very complete picture as far as what we're looking at and an understanding that what actually shows up on the dashboard is not any singular data set, but now we're able to start combining them so that we can do things where the data sets are checking against each other. We're also finding opportunities for machine learning in the future. So if we say we have a drop in speed as well as a accident reported, if we treat those as two separate ones, that's great for the operator. They're able to see that visually on a map. But as we sort of move into some of those next level analysis, can we actually start figuring out what do they look like and how do we actually sort of get into those different pieces and figure out where do they actually look like? As well as that last one about making sure there are time and date splits on here so that people can dive in and understand a little bit more about the data. And as we get there, of course, we're now moving into sort of those analytical outputs. Like I said, we've transformed that sort of data into information, which is now our performance measurements. So now we're looking at a lot of the different characteristics of the data itself. And this is where we're seeing a lot of things about our sort of traditional performance measures, travel time, TTR, TTI, PTI, some of those things coming in, as well as looking at the operational level and the maintenance side of saying, okay, what's out there, what do we need to do with it, how's it working, and of course the more complicated data analysis all sort of happens at this level. We're still sort of molding the data into the performance measures that we want it to be, coming from that raw data that was underneath. Now that we've done all of that, now we can actually start getting into the point of saying, let's take and let's put it out there and let's start actually putting it on the screen. Of course, one of the things to consider, especially in regard to how we put that data on the screen and what are we ultimately doing with it, is to consider some of the other initiatives that are out there, such as Map 21, and the fact that a lot of this data and this information can be used to directly help facilitate this reporting and make sure that we are addressing a lot of these different requirements that are out there, so that even though we're ultimately putting this on a dashboard, we've sort of taken that raw data, we transformed it, we can actually use it for multiple reasons. We can help it do some additional things and make sure that we are driving the process forward. So now that we've gone through that, now we're finally ready to put it on the screen. Now we're ready to talk about the visualization component and sort of what does that look like and what do we put on there and how do we go about that. And this is where things, you really have a lot of options here. And one of the pieces about this, that when we're talking about the dashboards, and I know one of the most common questions that come up around a lot of this is sort of, what platform do I use? Which one should I put it in? Which one's the best? And the truth is that there are a lot of really good platforms out there as far as the dashboarding engines themselves. And what really is more important is understanding what it is that you're trying to do and make sure that each one of those different dashboarding engines will support the sort of the goals of what you're trying to show it. So is it a case where you are trying to show the color to indicate the status of the road across the entire network? That's going to be something that's very map-centric. You want to be able to see that. Is it something that's very chartable so that you're going to look at it, you're going to be able to get sort of a quick reference about what's happening over a corridor? Maybe it's something that's showing you whether the speed has declined in the last 20 minutes or if there's an accident that has occurred, as well as also starting to get into some of those advanced analytics where we're looking at possible diversion routes and detours and starting to understand sort of what do those look like if we're going to move traffic around, where could we actually send it that won't negatively impact that part of the roadway as well. Just understanding what those different types of characteristics can look like. As we're talking about that, here's a few examples I'll walk through. So this one's actually very map-centric. You can kind of see that one of these is from FDOT, one of them is from New Hampshire. And you can see that it's very map-driven. You've got the ability to click on it. You're seeing colors. You're seeing alerts. You're seeing icons, things that pop up that alert a user so that it's easy to sort of look at this from a step back and understand what's happening out there and where are some locations that things need to be done on. At the same time, as I mentioned, you talk about this through these charts and graphics so that you can set some things that will actually be able to pop up and tell you information. And what's great about a lot of the charts and the graphics is it's easy to set baselines on there, so you can kind of see the middle one and then the one on the right. There's a red line that sort of gives me an idea of what is expected that's happening out there. And then you can see, am I falling on the left of it? Am I falling on the right of it? Sort of what's going on my network, and is that something that's being driven with that information? And then, of course, you've got more of your just purely analytical and infographics. As Michael talked about before, you're sort of seeing that trend happening across here. We had sort of the operational dashboard, and we had some of the more planning dashboards and some of the reporting dashboards. And that's kind of what you're seeing here, is that now we're starting to move towards a idea of what is the dashboard ultimately needing to do, which of course ties back to the needs of making sure that we are ultimately answering those questions that were established very early on when we were first talking to our stakeholders about what is this dashboard intended to do and who is it ultimately serving, to make sure that as we get into here and we're putting performance measures on the screen, we're giving out these infographics, that we are answering the questions to the best of the ability. So thank you very much. And I think at this point I'm going to now hand it over to Mark Sommerhauser with Kansas and Missouri DOT.
All right, thank you very much, Keith. Your questions that you proposed in your presentation are very familiar to me. These are questions that we've had for a number of years. Again, my name is Mark Sommerhauser. I'm the Scout ITS Project Manager at the KC Scout Traffic Management Center. It is a joint traffic management center run by the Missouri and Kansas Departments of Transportation. One unique thing that I always like to point out, our regional map, those are our cameras and our areas, but we are very unique in the fact that our metropolitan area is about 50-50, whether you look at interstate miles, population, traffic patterns. The region is half in Kansas, half in Missouri. If anyone's interested, there is technically a Kansas City, Missouri and a Kansas City, Kansas, plus 40 plus odd other municipalities in the region. But I am going to take a minute to go through the history of some of our discussions with traffic dashboards and specifically kind of the process that we went through because it is a little unique. We launched operations in 2003 at the Scout Traffic Management Center. By 2005, we were 24/7, 365 days a year. And the big change came in 2009 as we transitioned to a new advanced traffic management system software. That included a completely new database structure. That got us away from a very complex Unix-based structure to SQL Server, and it opened the door for us to do a lot more with data. We knew we wanted to do more with our data and get traffic dashboards out there along with performance measures that were really outcome oriented and not just an output and a number. We wanted something that would really affect operations. So we were excited back in 2009 as we transitioned to 2010 and started that discussion. We ran through the capability maturity model. We looked at national performance measures, data structures that were out there, and we were very excited. And the reality is we were expecting that there was going to be an easy button, that we would be able to implement something, hit it, and that would give us, through the dashboard and everything that was needed as far as outcome-related performance measures, a traffic dashboard that everybody could understand. And quickly as we got into it, we realized after going through the user requirements, we really needed more of a Swiss Army knife. The number of requirements when we were asking those kind of questions and going through the user requirements, it was so many data points, so many users and so many needs. It wasn't going to be an easy button that you would just be able to hit and give you something that would fulfill all those needs. So after a lot of deliberation, we knocked it down to 3 distinct data priorities back in 2010. The first was an XML web service feed for our Scout Detector data and our incident data. We knew that partners and three-party applications were out there that wanted that. We were going to concentrate on getting that out. We were going to develop and have a data portal with our Scout Detector data and incident data that could be password protected. That would be more for internal use. That would allow it to be organized, filtered, and managed. And then third, we would develop a traffic dashboard on the public website. That was the last priority, and that was eventually launched in 2014. So I will go through the second 2 data points. I won't talk any more about the XML web service feed, but again, that was making sure that that stuff could be readily shared so other people who didn't want to look at the DOT websites or the Scout-specific regional website and use third-party apps could get that data readily. I will go into a lot more detail about the second and third items. The data portal It's a simple password-protected website. We don't publicly put that web address out there, but you can find it. And its main purpose is to make sure that we have both our speed and volume detector data information readily aggregated and accessible, and have all of our incident data readily available. Once you get into it, the detector data is pretty straightforward. You can pick any of the detectors, you can filter it by times. This is all historical stuff. If people are doing traffic studies or reports, they can get into that data. That's pretty self-explanatory. Again, we know there's a value, especially in that speed and volume data together, and we want to get it to as many of our partners internally, consultants, both the Kansas and Missouri DOT, as easy as possible. The incident side is a lot more tricky. That gets into what we call the event viewer that we developed. There are some graphics that we put out there that could kind of be related to a dashboard, but the user requirements distinctly stated in there, we didn't want to spend a lot of time on graphics and summaries and dashboards with this data portal. Its purpose was to be easily accessible, filtered, and then pushed to other reporting tools where you could then take that data to another application and make your graphics that way. We really didn't want to spend a lot of requirements and development in making it very graphic intensive. So I will go through a few of these areas. This left side is the filter area. These are all the timestamps and different things that we develop in an incident, and it allows you to really drill down to just what you want to look at if you're doing a query. There are some dashboard elements. On the right-hand side, you can see that we have some incident summaries, some blockage duration summaries. Time to clear has always been one of the most critical things that the Traffic Management Center strives to improve our clearance times for incidents. Both the Kansas and Missouri DOTs really push that. And it's even more critical in our Kansas City region because the highway patrol personnel, both in Kansas and Missouri, only patrol about 20% of the interstate miles. We have 40 plus odd emergency response groups from large cities to even volunteer fire departments. So we are training and trying to share this data with a large number of people who are really directly responsible for lane clearances, blockage durations. So we do have some simple graphics to help this, but behind the scenes, when you can filter out that data to specific targeted groups that you're meeting with an easy to use filter really helps. If you get into some of the details and actually click into an incident, we did create some graphics that talked about a timeline of an incident. This is just one random one I pulled up with one of our small Riverside fire and police departments that responded. It gives you a very easy to understand timeline of when the incident occurred, when were the clearance stamps. We can pull this stuff up and do a quick after action report with, again, one of the largest response groups to one of the smaller ones. Again, we didn't want this to be very graphic intensive. This was supposed to be something that was very simple and something that we could immediately do the next day. So all this timeline information, all processes overnight and is available the next day. This is not in the real time. These are summary reports that are run overnight and then can be accessed again the very next day. Another example here that talks about when the lanes were open and closed, what were the message boards that were activated, what did they say, what were the travel times. Again, this is supposed to be something that's very simple. If we were going to do a very detailed report and we wanted to be very graphic intensive, we would output this to a more, I guess you'd say, graphically pleasing summary report, but we wanted it to at least have some basic level of graphics in order to help with the reporting and visualization. The event viewer can, when you're done with filter, it'll show you what you filtered. So I did a random filter, and these were the number of accidents. I think these were all the accidents in one day that involved one lane or more being closed. So this is just a quick visualization. We did not spend a lot of time and effort. This was something simple that we could do with our existing system. Again, the idea is if we wanted something to be a report that was going to go to more users, we would make it much more pretty and much more graphically pleasing and simplified. But this gives us something just right off the bat within a few clicks that you can do and place incidents, again, to help you see where they were. So the next part that I'll go into are the event viewer and the data portal. We made that conscious decision not to spend a lot of time and effort in requirements and graphics. This is an example of one of our staff members outputting that data into something that's more graphically pleasing and summarized. This is, again, incidents logged by the operators. It gives it the same data. It just makes it a little more well-defined. We can make summaries. These are all the filter fields that are available. This is just an incident summary that we made for different levels based on the total incidents logged and the average time to clear lanes based on a filter that we put in. And this is just a different map that we drop the number of incidents on. So this specific example is a Kansas DOT on the Kansas side. These are all the incidents related to a snow event. We wanted to have an after-action discussion with the maintenance staff. There wasn't anything bad. It was just we wanted to identify trends based on a day-and-a-half winter snow event. So we mapped them all out, placed all the incidents, gave them a quick summary report, and then had that discussion. It really helped facilitate what are some of the trends that we're seeing, where are the areas where we had more incidents related than others, and they could maybe even adjust their snow operations or shift staff members. This is a special report we did about tractor trailer trucks in Missouri. Again, we outputted all that information, put it in something that was more of a nice graphical report. We could do it by route, the number of incidents, the time to clear, place it on, again, another map, and even create heat maps based on areas. Again, I want to stress, we decided in the user requirements we were not going to put that all into the data portal software. We would just make the outputs and the filters simple that we could download and export it to something that could do that readily and more easily. So I did want to bring up the fact that MoDOT has had a tracker performance measure report for years. Since 2005, we used to have Excel and Access databases with all sorts of macros. Having the data portal really simplified that. We're able to make a filtered report give us a very clear average time to clear traffic incident. This is one of the main performance measures that they've tracked since 2005. We used to be able to do that with the old database, but it was very cumbersome and took 20-odd steps. Now with the data portal, aggregating things and make it very easy to filter and query, that is the one area where it has almost turned into an easy button. We know that this report since 2005 is needed every single quarter, so we've added that over the years in the data portal to make sure that we can just click a couple filters and it'll automatically give us that time to clear traffic incident. So again, some of the reports are a little more user-friendly than others, but the reality is in all of them, we export the query, go to another application, and if we're going to develop a visualization like this, we make it through that other application and not from the data portal. So the third aspect that I discussed was the Scout Traffic Dashboard. This again was developed and launched in 2014. This was going to be placed on the public website, and there's two main areas that it was going to provide. It provided an at-a-glance interactive, which is just the name we came up for, historically replaying what the Scout public website looked like. And this is mainly for after-action reviews, so we can discuss incident response coordination, how to improve that in the future. And then Scout Detector graphs. These are some graphs that really give us some information about our detectors, what's going on in the field with speeds and volumes and occupancies. The Scout public website, if you look at the top of the board, there is a traffic dashboard header. If you click the traffic dashboard header, it defaults to the at-a-glance interactive. And again, this just replays what the Scout website really shows. So I put a time period in, a random date from 2019, and you can click and it'll march through exactly what the website was showing at that time. You can hover over incidents if you want to know when lanes were closed and when they opened. It'll give you construction work zones, incidents, color bands. And again, the main thing is it allows you to see what happened in the past and do some good after-action analysis. We have examples of the Royals Victory Parade in 2015 where incidents, it was one of the worst traffic days we had. Unfortunately, people were abandoning cars on shoulders and doing things that really disrupted the whole regional traffic patterns. And it was a nightmare of a traffic management day. As we moved into 2020, and fortunately we had Kansas City Chiefs Victory Parade in 2020, this was one of the things we worked with our responders to make sure we were better prepared. If you look through that date, we can go through from 8 a.m., 9 a.m., 10 a.m. We managed traffic much better. We did not have people abandoning vehicles. There were a lot better response plans. But this gave us an option to review what that incident response was. We've done this for construction projects where maybe a construction detour on the Kansas side disrupted MoDOT traffic on the Missouri side because they didn't know about a companion work zone. We can pull that up and actually do an after-action review and see what that looked like, where were the speeds dropping, where was the congestion, and it really helps everyone understand what's going on regionally. The other aspect of the traffic dashboard that we've concentrated on is the detector side. We can go in and pull out a number of detectors and graph them based on two different ways. We can do them by segment or by individual detectors. So if you go to the actual home page and look on the detector side, you can pull up a segment graph and highlight a specific segment and see what some of the speed trends are. You can map out your speed analysis and the travel time. You can see how the actual speedometer works and actually play that over time, and the speedometer will change over time as you set that. I will say the segment analysis probably has been one of our least used ones, especially with the prevalency of probe data. Probe data tends to do a better job showing segment trends better than averaging and aggregating individual detectors. If you do go to the individual detectors, you can pull out a speed chart that will actually look at speeds and volumes per detector over multiple days. This is an example of one specific detector that's in one of our more congested area over 3 days of the week, and it'll map out the volumes in the bar chart and the detector speeds on the line chart. And we actually provide a bottleneck point. This was actually specific worst case detectors in the region that cause more bottlenecks than others. So they're the exact same report as that individual detector report. They're just the most highly ranked congestion points. And that's something that we put out there just in case the public wanted to see. Before I wrap up the detectors, I do want to give one quick example. We had a ramp metering question come in that some people were questioning, well, why did you spend the effort to put ramp metering on a specific ramp? Well, I was able to pull out a detector report to location, put in the dates before and after, and show them that the congestion did not completely go away after ramp metering, but it compressed the time frame. It's a lot shorter of a congestion period. It's now only about 30 minutes versus an hour and 20 minutes. And that was something I could easily do just by going to that detector, pulling out the chart, snapshotting it, and sending them a response within less than 5 minutes. This is again a zoom in of that before and after graph that I sent. So again, I covered that quickly. I hope that at least gave an idea of kind of the process we went through when we tried to discuss our data. The Scout Traffic Dashboard has not really changed since 2014, and that's even specifically, not just due to funding. We really wanted to concentrate in taking the queries and the filters and the reports and spend the time and effort and getting them into a special report that had meaning and really told a story. We didn't just have an easy button that we could hit that could spit that out. And I give that example of, I can have a graphic that shows the total number of emergency response motorist assists in a year or a quarter, but when you attach that to a quote from a motorist who was very grateful that they were helped with their 2-year-old granddaughter in the back seat, that's something that we tie that information, that graphic, to that quote, and we'll put that out in a special report or a Facebook or a social media report, and that tends to be a lot more powerful than just publishing a quarterly or a monthly graph that's out there. So we've tried to take these outputs and really tell that story that tie the query and the data portal specifically to some of those stories that we wanted to talk about. So again, I covered that a lot of graphics. I hope I didn't inundate people with too many screenshots. But with that, I'm going to wrap up my part. There are links that are provided to either the dashboard or the data portal. We'll do questions at the end. And I will turn things over to Christine Shafik with the Florida Department of Transportation. She is the state ITS software engineer.
Thank you, Mark. The good news is I'm the last presenter, and I'm going to make it even better. I'm going to try to make it as short as I can. So my name, as Mark mentioned, is Christine Shafik. I represent Florida Department of Transportation. I'm a part of the Traffic Engineering Office. I manage the ITS software statewide. Today, I'm going to share with you a unique dashboard that was developed based on the upper management request. I'm going to go over the goals of the dashboard, users, functions. I'm going to go over the data structure, data sources, application use, and the platform. I'm also going to go over a couple of lessons learned to share with you today. So the traffic monitoring analysis dashboard, it was originally created as a resource to monitor current and recent traffic volumes and vehicle crashes, as well as changes to each as a result of COVID-19. We started working on this application back in March 2020. We utilized Esri cloud-based platform. The original, as I mentioned, the original audience, we targeted the executive leadership team. expanded later to central office traffic engineers and managers, district traffic engineers and managers. So our dashboard consists of 3 tabs or 3 sub-dashboards. We're going to go over it in detail shortly. Each dashboard has an interactive map. This map contains the data that drives the charts and graphs in the dashboard. Every map also has a companion live traffic map. The extents of both maps are tied together. Therefore, movement in one map will automatically shift the focus and extend in the other map. The first tab or dashboard is called SunGuide Traffic Data Dashboard, and SunGuide is Florida Department of Transportation ATMS. The dashboard contains data obtained from microwave vehicle detector system sites, MVDs, and the data is provided by a real-time geo-event streaming service and is updated every hour. As you can see on the left side, we have a speed gauge, which delivers the hourly average speed by direction. On the right side, we have a vehicle per hour bar chart displaying the hourly volume. Both the speed gauge and the bar chart are interactive and will update based on the MVD size within the map extent. On each dashboard or on each tab, we have the upper banner consisting of multiple selectors to help the user filter the data, such as the district selector, which allows the user to filter by district, MVD site to zoom in a specific site. Also, the contract ID is an option for specific construction project that can be found and zoomed on the map. On the second tab, it's called SunGuide Crash Data Dashboard. As you can see on the screen here, it contains data obtained directly from SunGuide, and on the left side there is a Data Health tab, which displays the percentage of data reported for the prior day. Also, there is a total crash by district chart bar right here, which shows the data split by district and crash severity compared to previous year. We have a crash per day bar chart displays the total crash per day split by crash severity as well. And on the top here, we have a time slider that can widen or narrow the date range. The third tab or dashboard is called the Telemetered Traffic Monitoring Site Dashboard, TTMS Volume Data Dashboard. Provides volume and speed data from TTMS sites, as well as comparison seasonal average. The vehicle per hour line chart displays the previous day's hourly volume compared to the hourly seasonal average, and this data is updated daily. The vehicle per day bar chart contains daily volume data split by direction. The data in these charts will be updated based on the TTMS that are located within the map's extent. The percentage change from seasonal average bar chart right here represent the change in the current volume from the seasonal average. That was a very quick overview on our dashboard. There's a lot involved in it, but I wanted to make it as short as possible to share with you other items like how we structure our data and how and talk with you about the data source. So the first tab, the SunGuide volume data, the data is sent to the Civil Integrated Management GIS team in a JSON file format. Data is then processed and published into a geo-event server, which is hosted on Esri Geospatial Cloud. And the SunGuide crash data and TTMS volume data are published through traditional map services as they include historical data. And on the second tab, the SunGuide crash data, we have 10 TMCs running SunGuide throughout Florida State. Each is connected to FDOT State ITS communications network, and each SunGuide instance instance, published real-time traffic and crash data via the center-to-center infrastructure. We are currently storing about 4 terabytes of rolled-up traffic data and about 1 terabyte of event data. And data is in a local SunGuide virtualized environment. For the TTMS tab, the data is sent nightly to an Oracle database. SQL scripts process the data and send the scripts to spatially enabled database. The data is then published into a service that can be consumed by the application. The software used to create the dashboards was initially ArcGIS Online, but it was migrated to a development environment in ArcGIS Portal later on. And why did we go this route? Basically, it's easy to understand, ready to use. It was interactive, flexible, configurable, and the best of it is that it was easy to integrate with our existing FDOT resources. Now, I'm going to share with you a couple of lessons learned and how we face the challenges and had an opportunity to learn something new in our dashboard. So the first item is regarding the data. There will always be discrepancies in data collected from multiple operating environments. As I mentioned earlier, we have 10 TMCs throughout the state that's using our SunGuide system. So how we solve this issue, we run scripts on the received data to bring all data into a consistent format. The second challenge we faced was the delivery mechanism. So the current C2C mechanism is very sensitive to interruptions. Any data lost during an outage is not recoverable. Currently, we're looking at replacing this with a separate mechanism that uses 1-minute batch data transferred via FTP. This is the mechanism we currently use to transfer data to RITIS. So we learned that we need a more robust data delivery mechanism in our system. The next lesson learned is regarding the environment itself. So as you know, as I mentioned earlier, the project was quickly evolving application, and the intended audience was not fully apparent at the beginning of the development. And as Keith mentioned in his presentation earlier, this is one of the keys for successful dashboards. So that was a challenge that we faced when we started this dashboard. What we would like to share with you from our dashboard development experience, to sum it up, clearly identify or define your audience before starting the development of your dashboard. Utilize more stable data connection for sending, receiving the district data or the sources of your data. As I mentioned, I'm going to make it as short as I can. So on the screen here, you'll see some resources, our SunGuide software link. You'll see the FDOT traffic data link, and you'll see the Esri ArcGIS online link as well. With that said, that would be my last slide. I appreciate the opportunity, and thank you for listening.
Well, thank you, everybody. We are going to now move to the Q&A session. Looks like we're pretty much right on schedule, so we will go through the questions that have already been posed in the question discussion pod. Thank you for those that did that. If you would like to ask a question, please indicate which speaker, if you have a speaker you'd like to direct it towards. Otherwise, I'll go ahead and just start asking the existing questions. So, first question from Umesh: what are the data sources for travel time and speed? Be it probe data, detector data. Anybody want to type in and go through all the possible data sources for travel time and speed?
So this is Mark. The Kansas City region, we have primarily radar detectors, so we're getting speeds and volumes that get saved in a database. If you look at the Kansas and Missouri Departments of Transportation, the Missouri Department of Transportation several years ago also bought into probe data. So we have the capability to use probe data in addition to the physical detectors that we have. Everything on our dashboard and our at-a-glance free player is our detector-based data. We would go to, well, it's RITIS and the Maryland Cat Labs to see the probe data on the Missouri side. So we have multiple avenues to look at ours.
Very good, thank you. Next question is on staffing. Do you see a need to train TMC personnel on either understanding, using the data, or possibly, some QA on the data that they feed to the dashboard? What other skills might TMC staff need as a result of having these dashboards available?
That's a tougher one. Again, this is Mark with TMC Scout. I know that we have a lot of discussion about inundating our traffic operators. So when you're talking about TMC personnel, the operators specifically, we have long discussions about how much data is too much data. So we want to make sure that it's simplified. I personally am excited to see some of the things that come out of the pool fund study about good, simple graphics on the dashboard real time in the TMCs, because that is really tough, because you want to have enough data that's meaningful, but you can't inundate the staff when they're listening to radio chatter, running the software, and 50 different inputs. So it's a very tough one that takes a lot of discussion and making sure that you're helping the operators and not overloading them.
Yeah, and I can add on to that just briefly, kind of iterating exactly that point. And that was one of the key things that we've found over the years of doing these different types of dashboards. And it really comes back to that, one of those early questions I posed about who are the users and what is the need. For that exact reason, you may be able to have a dashboard that does a lot of things, but if it is somebody that's sitting at a control panel and they're doing 10 or 12 things at once and they're trying to keep track of all that, having a lot of this additional information may simply be overload. One of the things that we've actually found that worked well on one of the dashboards we did, which was monitoring where we're seeing traffic change from what was expected, is the map itself stays relatively empty. And the only thing that happens is that particular segment will start flashing red just to kind of be a visual cue that that's something that should be looked at for that exact purpose of saying, okay, what is the person that really needs it to do? And it needs to just be something that's a visual cue for them to say, okay, I need to look at that, or I need to address that location. Whereas you may have other people who are coordinating other things that they really do need to have access to a lot more data and sort of all that information at once, so they can look and see where are the average speeds, where are the crashes coming in, do I have a camera available, have all of that inside of one dashboard. And that really does come into that just purely a communication side of talking with your users and making sure that you understand clearly what it is that they need it to be. And one other part of that too that I think Christine gave a great example of, don't think of the dashboard itself as having to be sort of a just one piece. You can have these sort of multiple screens or these split pieces off of that can be very focused to do that. So it doesn't have to be sort of a singular dashboard to just do one thing. You can actually split it up to fit those different needs, so that depending on who the user is, there's one that's very simplistic that allows them to just see the bare information they need, and then you could have one that still fits the needs of your planning team and your executive leadership that has a lot more information, including reporting available.
Thank you both. Just one more question on the staffing and employees from Michael. Do you think there's an optimum number of employees that's needed to be able to take this information and send it to the public? Another tough question. The answer might be it depends. We'll kind of change gears here a little bit. Another question from Michael. What are your guys' thoughts on a cloud-based system so that you can work from a central location or a remote location? The reality is that a lot of TMCs are facing right now split staff that impact dashboard where they're hosted at all.
So I think one of the biggest pieces around that, and again, this sort of gets into the, every answer I think is very unique to sort of what you need to do. And the idea of having the cloud-based versus central or having remote ability, a lot of that really comes into the security side of the dashboard itself, as far as is there data and information on there that is sensitive, and making sure that it is sort of locked down, especially if you're going to go to something that is cloud-based, making sure you got the security pieces in place. Because that is kind of one of the biggest drivers around that, is making sure that, for instance, if you're going to have CCTV cameras that are in there, making sure that you aren't, putting out the IPs, or that people on the outside can't get to your IPs, your cameras, and making sure that it is secure and it is controlled. I mean, we're definitely seeing a change in how technology is driving now, that, cloud-based systems are becoming more and more prevalent and more used by a lot of folks. But I do think that it is always going to be very specific to that agency as far as what's allowed, and are they an organization that's embracing the cloud, or an organization that's not. And of course, you've always got a lot of things to consider there, because of the fact that, especially in the case of TMCs, where you really have such a critical role in transportation, making sure that if you are going to do something that is cloud or remote, that you are operating in the most efficient way possible, and making sure that you're ultimately meeting all of those needs. I think it's probably something that's very specific, and probably needs to be answered with a lot of other questions before you could ultimately just say yes.
Thank you. So, question here on the business intelligence tools available. Obviously, there's a lot available, and I think the question from Anthony is there a recommended software platform for producing and displaying dashboards? A lot of people are probably familiar with Tableau, Power BI. You could possibly write your own. Are there recommendations or things to gravitate towards, or maybe things to avoid when it comes to software?
I'll answer first, and then I'd certainly encourage anybody else to jump in. We actually address some of this in the report itself, where we talk about a few of those different dashboarding platforms that are out there. And one of the things, again, that this does come back to that, that sort of idea that there really is not a singular software platform that's recommended. Microsoft Power BI does some very good things. Same thing with Tableau, and of course, if you need something very customizable, you're going to go the route of writing your own custom application. Or even you have new and emerging cloud-based ones that are, like the Esri platform that Christine was showing, or some of the other tools that that Mark showed. There's a lot of different options out there, and what I've kind of consistently found is it really does come down to the needs as far as what you're trying to do. Just for my preference alone has been, when we're dealing with sort of the big data side of it, we need it to get out there as quickly as possible. Using some of those tools and resources that are either just customized or platform driven to get that sort of ultimate leveraging, such as like Kibana, which is on the Elastic search stack, or the Hadoop equivalent. They're going to do very well in that. Same thing with Tableau as far as speed goes. Then when you're getting into more of the visually appealing and things that are a little bit easier to read, Microsoft Power BIs are very clean. They're very friendly. They accept incoming APIs very readily. The Esri system has got a lot of these tools sitting on top of it as well now, so that you can leverage it. A lot of it really does come down to some of those early project requirements that you're going to define about what are those charts and maps and things look like. What's the main focus of it? Is it map-centric? Is it chart-centric? What do the reporting engines look like? There's a lot of things to consider when you're looking at that, and I would certainly encourage anybody, if you're looking at a dashboard for the first time and trying to figure that out, don't just pick one and go. Take a look at 3 or 4 and really make sure that it's going to fit the need that you ultimately want.
Requirements are ultimately leading towards a software solution and not vice versa.
Yeah, this is Mark. I'll bring up kind of the funny part of my presentation again. The big thing is, don't be scared to do nothing, do something. Again, we talked about how we expected it was going to be so easy. and we really found that it wasn't going to be one solution. Again, try to find what's out there and what looks and works best, what someone else has already created, and then take that engineer and lock them in a room and make sure you get your public involvement people involved to, again, tell the story. So the graphic is one thing, but making it meaningful is another thing. And whatever software or product you can do that is graphically pleasing but allows someone else to add some context and storytelling to it goes a long way versus just a chart.
Very good. Mark, another question directed towards you. Does the KC Scout dashboard provide ramp metering rate data? And if so, does it provide the metering rate versus the actual or observed meter rate?
So we decided not to make that a user requirement. That detail, the traffic engineer can query the actual controller to get that, and then every night there's a PDF report that gives all the timestamps and changes historically the next day. But we decided that would be a canned report that runs overnight. If somebody needed it real time, they could query the controller directly. So that was our user requirement decision with that.
Thank you. Question directed towards Christine. How long did it take to develop the 3 dashboards?
So as I mentioned earlier, we got the request back in March, end of March, so we started in April. It was fully functional in June. So I would say about 2.5 months.
Seems quick. Question in general, how many TMCs have integrated PSAP or CAD data? Take the operators out of the middle of it. And the reason that Claire's asking this question, incident management performance is a really big issue. In Northeastern Illinois, they know very little about what's going on there. So,
this is Tim Lomax. I just went through the survey. I saw this question coming up, so I went back to our database, and it looks like maybe a quarter to a third of the folks who we heard from had something about that. That sounds relatively low, but again, think about who's in the TMCs, and the users, providers of those information aren't in a lot of TMCs. But again, that's from our targeted outreach.
Got you. Let's see, just a couple more questions here. Another question from Nathan for either Mark or Christine. Have you initiated ongoing QA/QC efforts to improve the quality of the various types of source data? For example, incidents that were forgotten to be given an end time, and you don't want those to arbitrarily hike up the incident clearance times or whatnot, or missing fields and response times, other things like that. Any amount of effort to improving the quality of the data?
So in Kansas City, our operator supervisors review that daily. So the next day they review, they mark and edit any fields that are missing, especially with timestamps. They do also meet with the employees and review with them for things that are missed, whether it's an IDIS code, a timestamp, something like that. But we want to make sure for the incident clearance times and such, those data fields are corrected as quickly as possible because clearance is such a major issue for both the DOTs in Kansas City.
This is Christine from FDOT. Yes, we have identified a couple of areas. Some of them are like the timestamp area. Incomplete data is detected in real time. We also run the script on the received data to bring all the data into a consistent format and make sure that we have all the data needed to be QC'd and QA'd before.
I'm curious, as a follow-up question, have you found that just having the dashboards present and visible inside of the TMC, has there been just a natural increase in the level of quality because starting to see the performance measures and whatnot visualized, or are those separate?
It makes a difference. It's really important for the employees to understand it's not a timestamp or stating or doing something correctly isn't just X's and O's. It really is meaningful. So we make sure that that goes back to the individual operators and they understand the importance of that. And it's definitely challenged them and helped that quality of how things are coded and timestamped for sure.
All right, thank you. Final question targeted towards you, Christine. Does all of your data reside locally or in the cloud? Do you have any real-time data gathering to get visualized?
Yes, we do have some real-time data gathering as well, and some of them are reside. As I mentioned, we have 3 different sub-dashboard that serve different purposes. But
well,
yeah, we have those.
All the speakers and good presentations, good findings, and thank you for all the questions. And I think at this time we're slightly ahead of schedule. No complaints there. We'll pass it over to John for closing remarks.
John, thank you for the facilitation of the questions and answers and for your leadership in this project over the last couple of years. Greatly appreciate your contributions, your leadership, as well as the participation of others on your staff and from the Ohio DOT for the TMC Pool Fund study. We greatly appreciate you willingness to stand up and be a leader. Christine and Mark, fantastic presentations. You guys are doing a great job. Thank you for all your efforts and for your willingness to pull this together, provide the presentations, and go into the detail that a lot of people appreciate. You can see from the questions and answers that people are looking for more information, and your experience and what you're able to provide for additional questions and answers, we're greatly appreciated. And we also appreciate you fitting this into your busy schedule, and I greatly appreciate all that you've done. To the contract team, Mike, Tim, Keith, Sunil from ICF, we can't wait to get your project finished, published, and available for everybody to access and use. So I appreciate all the hard work that you've all put into this project and the product that'll be forthcoming, which is the TMC Performance Dashboards project, and the final report is on this. The final report number is on the slide. Once it's available, it'll be on the Pool Fund Study website. You'll also be able to link to and find this report from the web page that Nilo and Patrick from National Operations Center for Excellence has created, where all the presentations and the recording will be. So you've got a one-stop shop if you want on this topic for this website. So to all the speakers, job well done. Thank you for the final report that I've seen. I've enjoyed reading over the last 6 months, 3 or 4 times, and I've learned something every time I've gone through it. So for those that have yet to see that report, boy, we hope we get it out soon because it is good. And I encourage you to share it with others within your organization. When you push that document out to others, please point to and provide the link to this web page where folks can go learn more and listen to the presentations or page through them at their convenience. Patrick and Nilo from NOCO, thank you for your partnership, your willingness to support the TMC Pool Fund study, and to share information with our customers. We greatly appreciate all that you do and your hard work. Thank you, thank you, thank you. For others that are still on the webinar, please reach out to me. We'd love to have your agency or organization join the TMC Pool Fund study. We have a lot of projects underway. We're going to be selecting more projects. This is just a fantastic example of what we can do to help deliver information, practices, current issues and challenges, and connect the leaders from around the country that are exploring and gaining experience on an issue to share it with others. So it's a partnership by all those that contribute money, as well as the Federal Highway Administration. It's a great network to help identify where we need to go, what you need, and how we can all contribute to deliver and make it all happen. So the challenge is on us to deliver that. So we look forward to your participation and help moving forward to get it done. With that, Patrick, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you for all your hard work and help. And any other speakers, any last thoughts? If not, we have another webinar.
Thank you so much, John.
In September. Please look at the NOCO. I was going to say one last thing, Patrick. We do have another webinar with the TMC Pool Fund Study that we've got scheduled in September, and I apologize, I forgot the date. It's looking at the health index of ITS devices and assets, which builds on that performance monitoring and using a dashboard concept. So definitely look at the NOCO list of webinars, and that one will be taking place in early September. Thank you, Patrick.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, John, and to all of our presenters. Wonderful job, and thank you to everyone that stayed with us. One of the easiest ways you guys can just kind of stay on top of all this information that John mentioned that is forthcoming will just be to subscribe to our newsletter that's on our website. But we want to wish you a wonderful day, rest of the day. Have a great day, and the recording will be available within a couple of days to a week on our Knowledge Center. So with that, have a wonderful day, and